All right. I made a couple of mistakes last week after I listened to it this morning, which I usually do. I always do. And one of them was, it's going to sound like a small thing, but who knows who's going to listen to it. I get pounced on. The Edict of Milan wasn't 317, it was 313. So you can throw rocks at me or eggs if you want. And if you don't remember what the Edict of Milan was, it's a very important date in the history of the church and in your heritage because in 313, it wasn't that Constantine made, uh, he had actually become emperor, I think, in 306 or 7 or something. He was emperor in the West, and there was kind of like a civil war. And to make a long story short, which is fascinating, he won. And so he became emperor, the emperor. And in 313, he issued an edict. Christianity was not one of the, let's call it licit. There's illicit and licit. Illicit drugs are illegal drugs. Licit drugs, ibuprofen, that's a legal drug. So Christianity went on the list of the legal religions, the sanctioned religions. And so Constantine, this is more of my mistake from last week. It wasn't that he became that it wasn't that he became a specifically Christian person at that time. They did this a lot. He absorbed Christianity into his set of beliefs. And so he was still actually minting coins with other deities on them. So this becomes part of it. And then probably, or no, not probably, in his final days, he was baptized as a Christian, which would have been, I think, 337. So that was a full 24 years later, 12 years after the Council of Nicaea that he presided over. But there's kind of this impression that he became this monotheistic Christian emperor right away. He saw his vision of the cross and the vision of the cross, and then he had another message from God and so forth. But yeah, that's all ambiguous. He was a Roman. He was a Hellenistic, I mean not Hellenistic, he was a product of his time. But he wanted peace. He didn't want these warring religions and so forth. Christianity was growing in the empire. I think by that time it was estimated 3 million, 4 million Christians, in spite of the persecutions under Diocletian just before. That's what happens a lot, right? The persecution is supposed to end something, and it ends up producing the opposite. And so Christianity became legal in 313 with the idea of, having peace in the empire, stability in the empire. And then in 325, that's when he's watched, now that he's looking at the Christians war with each other over doctrine and so forth. And so that's what prompted, I think, the Council of Nicaea in 325. Also, one of the most important events in the history of the church, which produced a creed that's about 225 words long, and it's a remarkable statement of faith. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, and so on and so forth. One Lord, so on and so forth, which is absolutely worth reading today repeatedly. They worked that thing over for a long, long time. They handled other issues in the Council of Nicaea, but he presided over it, but he didn't weigh in. He just wanted all these bishops from the cities around the empire to get on one page. And so, in the interest of the empire. And so that's what he did. And so the product of that, among other things, was the Nicene Creed, which was then reworked in 381. The Nicene Creed was I think the major point of emphasis of it was to settle the question of a doctrine, we'll call it a heresy, known as Arianism, which was the belief that Jesus was a created being. In his words, there was a time when Jesus was not. We don't believe that. We believe there was never a time when Jesus was not. He was God in the flesh. He was God before, and he was God in the flesh. And so the Council of Nicaea soundly rejected Arianism through the, I don't know what you want to call it, Herculean heroic efforts of another person you're indebted to that you probably have never heard of, Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. For some reason, it used to be the case that all roads lead to Rome, but in the Christian world, all roads seem to lead back to Alexandria. I believe was Augustus, not Augustus, Augustine, whichever. I say Augustine. Was he Bishop of Alexandria? I know he was from Hippo, but anyway.
I think so.
So these are all Easterners in the empire away from Rome. They didn't come from Rome, and so they held this conference, Council of Nicaea, where they decided these fundamentally important doctrinal issues like the deity of Christ, which would then set the course for the church from then to today. So we are the recipients of that great blessing of, in my view, the Council of Nicaea. So that's the context here. Everything I just said, I said off the cuff, and I'm not a professional historian, obviously. So there's lots of good content on YouTube on this. There's lots of good books out there. I encourage both. I have a long list of both. But anyway, so a lot of that is represented, or a little bit of it anyway, is represented on this diagram, this schematic, but I made another one so we could settle in this morning. This is the remade version of the thing that you couldn't read the last time. And I have it. Did somebody take it? Gary never handed it out. So I didn't do a very good job. You're going to have to take one of each. I'm not walking away from the microphone. You can figure it out. So this is my revamped version. I don't know that I like AI for making diagrams. It always wants to over complexify. And, this is too much as well, but since you're going to get a handout on it, it's okay. You probably can't see that necessarily all the way in the back if you're over, 40 or something. But this is what we've been talking about. And I divided it up into, what was that? I divided it up into a few periods. So there's Jesus between 4 BC and 100 AD. So that's the first century. And I put some major points of contact with the gospel, with the Bible there. Most of that is that's not in dispute among evangelicals. You get outside of the world of evangelicals, it's another story. But we talked about the Rylands fragment, that little fragment of John 18 that was found in Egypt, that's dated from the first half of the second century, 100 to 150.
The what?
The Rylands fragment. And so that pushes all of the dating of the New Testament into the first century. Because if you got a fragment of John from 100 to 150 or 125 to 150 or whatever the number is, then that pushes John into the first century. And if you've been saying all along that John is the last gospel written, well, you just did yourself in if you want a late date, because now you have to push the other gospels earlier. And I believe that the other gospels were written in the 60s before Paul's death. So those are some major points of contact right there with the gospels, or with the Bible, when they were written, when the journeys happened, when they were written. Middle of the first century was an important flashpoint in the history of redemption. A lot going on. When God invaded space and time and didn't leave after he did so, really. He left, Jesus left, but the work continued through the Holy Spirit. And by the time, this one of the great, I don't know what you want to call it, accomplishments, I'll call it a miracle. But one of the great accomplishments, turning point, what's ironic turns in history is that the religion that was viewed with such hostility through the 200s and even into the very early 300s would by the end of the 300s, this period here, right here, by the end of the 300s, overtake all others and essentially result in a monotheistic drive for the whole empire. To the point where by the time of, Wycliffe, it was Christendom. Western society, European society was Christian society. They were the same thing. That's the strength of this, I don't know what you want to call it, overpowering of Christianity within the empire, all started by Constantine. What motivated Constantine? I just cracked right there. I don't know why. What motivated Constantine is whole PhD dissertations are written about that. And my guess is they're mostly right and mostly wrong. It's probably all of the above. He's a complicated guy. He murdered his wife and I think his son. His mother was a Christian, so maybe that's where it started. So he became emperor 306, 307 or something. He was born in 1372 or 4. So these guys, whenever you hear these names, these guys sound old. Oh, he must be 50 or 60. Well, there it is, right? He's, let's say 6 plus 20. He's in his 30s. Hannibal was in his 20s when he very nearly conquered Rome. A lot, you just got to scale down a little bit. Athanasius, the great defender of Christian, what we call Christian orthodoxy, was in his 20s when he started. He was exiled 3 times from Alexandria. He was bishop 3 times because he got exiled 3 times or something like that. Depending on who's in charge, go away, and then somebody else, and then come back, So this is the first 400 years. A lot happened in the first 400 years, and a lot of it's silent, but we know a little bit. We talked about John 18, the Rylands fragment, that little scrap, 31 through 33 and 37 and 38, which is the chapter that handles the great question that Pilate asks but never gets an answer to. What's the question? What is truth? Jesus just sits there. It's amazing that that's the fragment. That's the earliest fragment of the New Testament that we have. Who knows what else is sitting there in the boxes, in the crates that were brought back from Egypt, Oxyrhynchus, in the 1800s? Who knows what's still sitting in there? Because there's hundreds of thousands of scraps.
Stuff.
What? Stuff. Great stuff.
We saw the Rylands fragment when we were watching the movie Case for Christ about East Stovall
Yeah.
getting saved. And I recognized.
It's very distinctive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's start off by looking at that.
It kind of amuses me that in 313 you have something up here, Christianity becomes legal. That's kind of a interesting thing because Christianity is so personal. Christianity is so individualized that it doesn't need that stamp of approval.
Yeah, and I will take that one step farther. You are going up against the Christians when you assault Christianity.
When you what?
When you assault Christianity, you're going up. You're going up not only against the Christians, but you're going up against the Christian God.
Yeah.
And here we are. We're not going anywhere. Not because we're smarter or more powerful or we control everything, but because it doesn't matter. It's the unstoppable march of the gospel. You see it in Acts from beginning to end.
Absolutely.
Nothing, I've talked about this. There's opposition in Acts to the gospel. And the opposition is handled in different ways. In the case of the Sanhedrin, with Peter and John in the early chapters 3 and 4 and 5, those opponents are silenced. It literally says they had nothing to say. seeing that they were uneducated men, blah, 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 and they recognized them as having been with Jesus, and they had nothing to say. And then Gamaliel gives his little recommendation. I think you should just leave these men alone, lest you find yourselves fighting against God. What a remarkable statement of wisdom and of knowledge of how things work. We don't always know what God is doing. We know what we think is happening based on our own set of filters. Then there was, the execution of James, and in chapter, I'm sorry, let's go earlier, chapter 9, with the conversion of Paul, the man who sets out on a trip to Damascus, fanatically on a mission to destroy the church. How is God going to handle this opponent? Ends up preaching the gospel when he gets there. And he is saved by the people he went to destroy from the people he went to get help from, because now they wanted to kill him. So sometimes the gospel silences you, sometimes the gospel absorbs you. Then there's Herod in Acts chapter 12. He executes James. That'll work out well, right? Oh, the Jews really liked it. So he arrests Peter. Angel comes, which is, to me, only part of the interesting part. Angel comes, rescues Peter. He disappears. What happens to Herod? He dies. That's exactly right. And Luke draws the connection. Josephus tells the story and also talks about him being a bad person and under the judgment of God, I think. But there's three different ways. So now we get to the early 4th century, the 300s. Christianity is under assault, and part of the assault is there is no Bible as we think of it. There's just whatever these churches have, whatever they've managed to copy. Where's the book? Karen, what did I do with it? Oh, is it in here?
Why are you asking Karen?
Oh, here it is. We'll talk about this in a little, probably not this week, but I got to look at it. But so one of the things that happened that Constantine brought an end to was the destruction of manuscripts, because up until then, that was part of the effort to stamp out Christianity. You wanted to destroy the books that they had. So that all ended, and now we're back to our timeline. And I'm just talking off the cuff here. I probably shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do it anyway because I can't stop myself. So where are we here? I don't have any idea where we are either. So here's Constantine. Here's Constantine in Nicaea in 325 AD, 4th century, 325. They have their conference. If you wonder where Nicaea is, I think I got a, nope. Do I not have, never mind. I'm not going to waste time on it. It's over there in Europe, in eastern side of Europe. Turkey, by Turkey. We'll look at it later. So Constantine holds this little conference. All the bishops from the empire come in. Ironically, not the Roman one. He sends emissaries. He sends people for him. I don't know why he didn't come, but it's just one of those ironies of history. And that's going to change. This period is going to change everything between the edict and 313. Now you can see the move. Now there's the conference. We don't want, not only do we want stability, if Christianity is going to be legal, so we can have stability in the empire, we want the Christians themselves to be stable. So, hey guys, I'm gonna oversee this one personally. Get it together. Your biggest argument. Let's handle it. So that's what happens, among other questions. There was another interesting question that was settled at Nicaea, and I can't remember what it was. But that now you can see the push from legalization to kind of a coherent Christian orthodoxy. Because what is orthodoxy? Orthodoxy,
Church.
orthodoxy is the belief set of the people who win. You can look at it that way, right? We have orthodoxy within our church. If you ask, what is Christian orthodoxy in the United States? Good luck, right? There are no winners. There's just the various, you could almost call it sectarian. From the Lutherans to the Methodists to the Presbyterians to the Baptists, the Christians, you got the Greek Orthodox, you got the Roman Catholics. Every single one of those will define their orthodoxy differently and sometimes radically differently from what is orthodoxy in this room. But what's going on here is, in a sense, you've heard me talk about gatekeepers. And he who controls the gates controls everything. And what we're experiencing today is the shattering of the gatekeeping. The gatekeepers are falling one after another. Entertainment, music. One of these days it's going to happen in sports. The NFL is a pretty good gatekeeping system. Publishing, all of the gatekeeping for that is tumbling down. So what will Hollywood be in 50 years? Well, you don't have to have, not only do you not have to get money from Hollywood, from Sony or Columbia or MGM or something to make your movie, you don't need to do it in Hollywood, particularly because you can do so much of it digitally. You know, when you watch some of these movies, how much of that is not even real? So that's a gatekeeper coming down. Well, in this case, what's going to happen, ironically, is that Christianity is going to capture the gatekeepers. And they're going to do gatekeeping on behalf of Christianity. And that's going to last until that begins to see cracks in the edifice right here with John Wycliffe and what he did. And that will continue with the pit bull of the Reformation. If he was the morning star of the Reformation, I think that's a Luther quote. I'm not sure though. If he was the morning star of the Reformation, 100 and whatever that is, 100 and some odd years, 140 years earlier, then Luther's the pit bull. And so between these guys, and Tyndale, and Calvin, and Zwingli, I'm leaving somebody. I'm leaving a German out. I can't remember what his name is.
John's Hunt.
No, that's Wycliffe. The German that was with Luther. I can't remember. Anyway, Melanchthon. I think there's actually a third one. But anyway, so the gatekeeping then that existed at the time will come tumbling down. This will be the beginning of it. There'll be a Catholic response, which is not on here, known as the Council of Trent and other things, the Jesuits and so forth. Sort of a counter-Reformation movement, try to take back Europe in a sense, that will eventually result in a horrific 30-year war, 1611 to 1630, 1618 to 16, what is it, 48, which utterly transformed Europe and created the United States, in a sense, or was pivotal in it. But anyway, that's not a part of this timeline. So anyway, now you have kind of a crashing of the gatekeepers of the time, and the gatekeepers at that point was the Roman Church. I don't call it the Roman Catholic Church because I think that's debated. When exactly do you see the establishment of a uniquely Roman Catholic Church? You have a Western Church, which you can call Roman. You have an Eastern Church, which is Greek Orthodox. Yeah.
I think Luther, isn't he the one that nailed the?
Yeah.
Yeah. Luther helped the Catholic Church when he separated himself from the Catholic Church. He he helped establish a Catholic Church and a Protestant church.
Just like at Nicaea, when the Christians had to define their orthodoxy and clarify it. My hunch is Brian is right, because of the Protestant Reformation, they had to define themselves.
Yeah.
Specifically in contrast to the Protestants. That was the Council of Trent a little bit later. So we'll talk about all that later. We're still in this period right here.
So you're saying that the Eastern Byzantine Church is older than the Western?
No, I'm saying the other way around.
Okay, the timeline makes it look that way to me.
Yeah.
No. These are two different. There's an Eastern church that is sort of sprung into being with Constantine. There's a Greek tradition. I care about manuscripts. There's an Eastern. That's actually a little wrong now that you say it, in that when exactly did the Byzantine text type arise? Not that early. So I should probably fix this now that I've handed it out. But anyway, this is meant to sort of divine manuscript traditions. And so you have a Greek manuscript tradition, which I shouldn't put the word Byzantine in here because it's associated with a text type.
We have
And then-
a problem like that today in, just driving through town and watching the names of churches. They don't ever tell you what they are or what their doctrine is or what they believe.
Well, like,
And I saw one the other day, it said Jake's Church.
well, as long as Jake is in charge of it, I guess, Now, if I go in Jake's church and Biff is the person who's in charge, I'm gonna wonder about that. Where's Jake? I came in here for Jake. Where's Jake? Well, he died 40 years ago. What?
That's what I mean, is that
Just left of it.
there,
So anyway,
you never know.
Yeah.
I'm glad we say Calvary Baptist Church
Yeah.
out front, because we stand for something.
so you have, unlike this, which is poorly worded right here, this is referring to an Eastern Greek church, Eastern Greek manuscript tradition. This is referring to a Western Roman Latin tradition. That's the idea. So we'll get to Jerome in a second, but I want to talk about. We talked about the major manuscript finds of this early papyrus period right here, which is. Let's go back to this. This will be a little better now. So here's the era of the early papyri, the codices. The Christians, as I said, were probably early adopters of the use of the codex or the book style of writing instead of the scroll. Scrolls were actually considered the more refined academic way of publishing. And the Christians adopted the codex, the book, leaves, or what we call pages, which is why you see on the Rylands fragment, it's written on both sides. John 18's on both sides. Well, that's not a scroll. They didn't write on the back of scrolls. That's a papyrus codex. And so the point is that what we have in this early era, from the close of the New Testament period with John's writings through to, I'm going to just call it the Edict of Milan in 313, even though that's not really right. In fact, definitely not right. But you have most of the rest of the New Testament represented in these early papyrus codices. And the two I highlighted last week were the Chester Beatty and the Bodmer papyri. I think his name is Martin Bodmer, who were manuscript hunters, collectors. All their finds end up in museums and libraries and so forth. And so that's the early period. Uncontrolled writing. If you want to see an example of the sort of thing what it looks like, here's Bodmer. I think I pulled one out. So here's Bodmer. P66, very important. I can't read this. And I'm actually pretty good with New Testament. I'm pretty good with printed New Testament Greek in this Bible down here. But this here, that's what they were doing. It's just a guy. It's just a guy writing. He's got what's called an exemplar, what he's writing from. The master copy here, and he's just going to copy. He's going to write, which is what Karen did. Well, where's she at? Which is what she did for me here with Matthew and John. So we're going to look at we're going to look at this later because she replicated. She did what they did, and you'll see what they were up against when you try to do this sort of thing. And the history of the Bible and handing it on to the next generation depends on it. These were not professional scribes. They just wanted a copy for their own use. That's it. There's not. Yeah. That's because the real estate is too expensive. So no punctuation, no breaks, no white space. It just looks like this. So that's what the early papyrus codices would have looked like. We've got 60, 70, I don't know how many fragments like this, but you can go up on the Chester Beatty site and you can actually browse all of the manuscript fragments. So now we move from that period to after the edict, and then after the Council of Nicaea, and then a very important and relatively unknown thing happens in 331, which we only know about from Eusebius, the man who received it. I'm changing the word edict into decree because it sounds more like something, a word that people would understand. So we have the decree of Milan, the Council of Nicaea, and then the decree to Eusebius, where about 6 years after Nicaea, where Constantine says, all right, we this work, this orthodoxy, we need to disseminate. So you're going to publish 50 Bibles. That's the edict to Eusebius, this man. So we don't know exactly what happened with that edict, but you can see how Constantine works here. He just leaves no stone unturned, right? Don't leave anything to chance. We don't want these Christians still arguing like crazy over what's what. So we're going to make the Bibles and we're going to get them out there, and we're going to establish what Christianity is. And hopefully that'll make the Christian sect of all the religions stable. Maybe that's what he was thinking, because he's a smart guy. He's a weird guy, but he's a smart guy. So that's 331. 1700 years ago, something like that. Now, back to the Bibles. Now, we're going to see in the early to middle of that same century, professionally created Bibles, Old and New Testament, extremely expensive. And we have 3 of them. We have two of them, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. And they just so happen, not only would they have been extremely expensive, not only are they very professionally done, but they happened at the time frame for them happens to correspond to sometime shortly after this edict, this decree to Eusebius. So it'd be logical to assume that what we have in one or the other or both, Sinaiticus and or Vaticanus, are 1 or 2 of the 50 Bibles, because they were extremely, when I say expensive, I mean millions in today's dollars for one copy. 2 years of work on the part of the scribe. It's estimated that the cost of the Bible, one, would have been equivalent to the lifetime earnings of the median income at the time. So whoever did this had a lot of money at his disposal if you're going to do this 50 times. And really, there's only one candidate for that, and that's the full weight and power of the emperor in Rome. So you can see from the persecution under Diocletian in the late previous century, the 200s, and then the very early 4th century, the 300s, from that to within 50 years, less than that, 40 years, maybe 30 years, to the empire funding something like this work. That's the transformation in the situation for the churches of the empire. So the church, the Christianity then becomes, and therefore the bishops become gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are going to coalesce and centralize until eventually you're going to have a single gatekeeper, which will be the bishop in Rome. Certainly by Gregory in the 600s, early 600s, you have a preeminent gatekeeper. So this is Sinaiticus. It looks like a book. It's remarkable. This is parchment, vellum, which is animal skins, either cows or sheep, I think. And it's remarkable. They're what is it? 0.1 to they're like less than a millimeter thick. The pages are. So how much work does it take to take an animal skin and turn it into pages, stable pages that are white, that are less than a millimeter thick? So these books are, I think Vaticanus is 800 pages, 800 leaves or something like that.
Wow.
Very, very expensive. So this is, and you can also see, we looked at the situation with the previous papyrus codices, this right here. That's where they went from. Now it looks like this, much more like the kind of printing we're used to reading. You can see the columns, kind of begin and end, and it's all lined up, and we'll look closer here in just a second. So we go from this, so here's Sinaiticus. Man, if you had to write in block English, capital English, across a page into 4 columns, could you match this precision? I mean, it's really astonishing. The average guy, the professionally trained scribe, 2 years, they estimate, to copy one of these. So that's Sinaiticus, dated to the first half of the 300s. So sometime after, my hunch, after 331, because who would be doing this before that edict to Eusebius? Where do you get the money? So on and so forth. And then there's Vaticanus, which is about the same time, and you can see the same kind of thing. These coded, the great, what we often call the great uncial codices. I think uncial just mean block capitals. But heavily adorned artwork. Some of the artwork on even the later ones it's unbelievable. The artistry that went into them. So this is, what do we got here? This is, I don't know what this is. This is Hebrews 1. I can't read that. Hebrews 1 is tough anyway, especially at the very beginning, but hard to read. Then Vaticanus, I don't know what this is either. I have no idea. I don't know what that is. So that's, those are the great uncials. Why do they matter? We'll talk at length about this. They will matter. I'm going to get the right thing up in a minute. Because by the time you get over here, when our critical texts are being created, where did they go? What is the critical text? Talked about this last week. This is the critical text. The current version is the Nestle Aland 28th edition, printed Bible. This is the Greek text from which every Bible in front of you, except for the King James and New King James, is translated from. There's the critical text, and then what's often called the majority text, or the Byzantine, the received text, the Textus Receptus, which is a Byzantine text type, which is the King James and New King James, and we'll talk at length about that. But the point is that this is called, the claim is that this is an eclectic text, meaning it comes from a lot of different, they didn't abide by one rule. Hey, we're only going to use the Alexandrian tradition. They used what they did what they thought was right no matter where. So there are Byzantine readings in this, and probably Western readings. We don't need. There are other than Alexandrian readings in this. What's the point? The point is that both the I can't tell if I lost everyone about 10 minutes ago, but both of the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus texts, those are Alexandrian texts. That Egyptian Alexandrian text, like Chester Beatty and Bodmer, comes from that family over there. Somebody started copying over there where they were real serious, and it's very simple text, not expanding the text. It's the shortest text, which has a lot going for it. That's the Alexandrian text. I probably just biased, and I could be screamed at for being so biased, but whatever. I'm not alone. So you have the Alexandrian text. Then you have, I do have a slide on this. That's the Alexandrian. Yeah, you can see that. Here's Egypt down here. Can't see it. There's the Sinai. There's Israel. You go across, there's Rome. You have the Alexandrian, all this copying happening over here. They copy a certain way. They make their own mistakes because that's all they got. You're copying from a manuscript, so whatever that's all you got. So you're going to copy that manuscript, unless maybe you see a misspelling. So you fix a misspelling. But whatever the guy did that wasn't quite right in the previous one, you don't know that necessarily. So you copy that. So you can identify that family by its variants, by the places where it differs from other families of manuscripts. Then you have the same thing happening over here in the western part of the empire. They got their own text, and they're copying. That's a very expanded text. Acts is 10% longer in this Western tradition than it is in the Alexandrian tradition. Then you have the Byzantine. That word does not really apply. The Eastern, let's use that word. The Eastern text, which is the one that would have been there in the 5th and 6th centuries and so forth. That's a bunch of people got a hold of and started copying. But it just so happens that when Constantine gave his edict, it appears it was this Alexandrian text had made its way up there, and that was the one that gets codified, if you will, in Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, wherever those two things were copied, assuming that they were created on the orders of Constantine, which is, a decent but not a sure. It's a decent guess, but it's not a sure thing. So these are the three basic kind of text types. You have the Alexandrian, which is Bodmer, Chester Beatty, Alexandrina. Not Alexandria. Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, that tradition. And then what you're going to see a little bit later in the 400s is another one of the great uncials, which I didn't even put up yet, so I'll do it now. Let's do Alexandrinus. This is the third of the fourth great uncials that we found. These parchment codices, well done parchment codices. This one is from a little later, 400 to 450. And this text is going to be the same thing. Very well done. Hopefully this really is Alexandrinus, but very well done, right? Done by hand. It's incredible. But this is an example of this Byzantine majority text up here in the East, which is the tradition that the Textus Receptus comes from, which is the Greek text created by Erasmus, which we'll talk about, that was used to translate the King James Version. So from Alexandrinus, we don't know, but onward, that's actually a mixed text. Part of it is Alexandrian and part of it is Byzantine, is this majority text that dominated in the East. But anyway, that Eastern, that majority text part, that one part of Alexandrinus that's very different from the Alexandrian side, dominated in this part of the church and ended up resulting in the manuscript tradition that would produce the Textus Receptus. One of the great ironies, which we'll talk about later, of Erasmus's work in the 1500s to produce a Greek text of the New Testament, one of the great works of achievement in the history of the church, is while he's producing a Greek text based on no more than 7 or so manuscripts that are very late, the thousands, 1100s, 900 years after the New Testament period, he uses this Byzantine text. He uses manuscripts from this tradition that are within the last 500 years. While he's doing that, it turns out Vaticanus was in Rome. The Roman Church, the Catholic Church, had Vaticanus, which they have today. They had it back then. So I don't know why he didn't use Vaticanus. Oh, I know why. Because they didn't want him doing it. That's why. That would be why. They didn't want this. They didn't like innovation like this. Gatekeepers. That's probably why they didn't allow him to have Vaticanus. But it would be interesting to see how the King James Version would have been different if Erasmus had access to Vaticanus. Because it would have been a different text. Because there's Alexandrian text in Vaticanus. It's an Alexandrian text type. Have I just lost everybody, or I mean, I'm a geek on this stuff, so you know. All right. We'll hit up on that later too. I want to finish this so we can get on to that period of time. Is she laughing at me?
Later.
It is always later, I know. I never talked about the canon. I had all these slides up. I was going to talk about the Marcion, the Muratorian canon, which we'll do at some point. We got 5 weeks to go or something like that. Unless Phil's about to tell me it's really only 2 weeks. But all right. So the point is, these are the 3 of the 4 great unseals. The fourth one is Codex Ephraemus, which we're not even going to talk about. That's from later. But those are considered the 4 great unseals. Parchment, professional scribes, well done text, so on and so forth. Alexandrian, that's your text. The King James was done from a Greek text. That was Erasmus's text. Actually, it was technically, I think, the Stephanus text, which was a revision of Erasmus, but doesn't matter. A little bit later. Can I go back to what? This? Those are the only 2 slides I have. Oh, this? What slide?
It was a map.
Oh, this. Yeah. Those are you can Google all this if you want to learn. There's people that can have diagrams that can explain this very simply, better than I'm going to be able to do in the next X minutes. But these other churches, while I'm on it, because why not distract myself again? These other churches, they just fall off. They fall out of the picture, right? It really becomes Rome, Constantinople, after Constantine moves from Rome to what will then become Constantinople, because that was the real center of power in the Roman Empire at the time, in his view. And Alexandria, but with the Muslim invasion, Alexandria is going to get wiped out early, 600s. So this text type then will be cut off. So you're not going to find manuscripts from the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries from this Alexandrian tradition, because it's just gone. This is the tradition that continues on. Okay. That's out there. Yeah. But remember, important point. What happened to the Western text? I'll tell you what happened. It's right on this slide. What happened to the Western text? Oops. 405. Jerome comes along. Jerome was a scholar, a preeminent scholar, who belittled Augustine for his ignorance of such things as translations. That's fascinating. He wasn't wrong either. There's a story about Augustine trying to correct him on something, and Jerome basically insulted him for being a young amateur or something. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, so you have the great uncials or codices, parchment codices, papyrus right here, vellum, parchment, leather here, long lasting. And then in 405 BC or 405 AD, Jerome in the western side produces a translation into Latin. And this translation into Latin will then dominate that Western church, which is kind of the one we come from. That's why it looks, this is all done from the vantage point of us, from the vantage point of we're Western Europeans leaning people. That's where we come from. And from that vantage point, that church will then embrace the Latin Vulgate, Latin in general, for all the way up until, well, basically Tyndale, I guess, would bring, Erasmus will bring an end to it, which is really ironic because Erasmus was a Roman Catholic.
Do you have any idea of why they went Latin, which even at that time was a dying
Not according to Jerome. Was Jerome writing for the scholars or was he writing for the common person? I don't know enough about it, but I do know that it's called the Latin Vulgate, which is the common Latin. So I don't know, except to say, I can look into it a little bit more, but except to say that at this point in the West, this Latin, the Latin becomes the standard Bible, and the Greek will then just cease. So you're not going to see out of the Western side Greek manuscripts going on and on and on through the centuries. You're going to see Latin copying from Latin from Latin exemplars, on and on and on and on, until you get to Erasmus, who recovered what started with Wycliffe. That's another one of the ironies, right? Wycliffe translated from Latin into English. There was no Greek involved. And that simple act of rebellion, of subversion, of the gatekeepers would end up transforming both Europe and the church.
Amen.
And so,
You look fire.
so there you see the beginning of the gates being cracked, the gatekeepers. Erasmus will take the next step when he produces a Greek text of the New Testament that will then be used by Luther and Tyndale to produce translations in their own individual languages, which is German and English. And then we're off to the races. After that, it's orange. It's this color. It's whatever what?
Tyndale's translation was what, 1526? And by 1611, when the King James came out, that was like the seventh English translation.
Yeah, as a Matthew's there's a bunch of these Bibles. Yeah.
There was, before that, there was the Geneva
Yeah.
Bible.
We'll get to all that. I keep saying that. I hope we get to all that. So let's finish off with Jerome. I'm not going to say much about it except to say that Jerome then produced this Latin translation. It's one of the great works in history, in Western history. And between 405 and up until, I've got Wycliffe here, 1384, the Western Church embraces Latin. And it would be considered an act of treason, punishable by death, to move away from the Latin. So next time we'll pick up with, they're gonna fast forward to pretty much the Renaissance and Wycliffe and his work, and then on into, from a Bible standpoint, we can talk about the Reformation. I know a little bit about it, but I'm mainly interested in the transmission of the text part of that. It was all part of the same thing. It's incredible how subversive it is to just simply translate the Bible into a language that the person on the street understands. Then you don't have to go to church to hear the Bible. You don't know Latin. That's the mass language, right? And that was all the way through to the 20th century. That was a fight within the church, the Catholic Church, into the 20th century, later 20th century, over Latin, and whether the mass would continue to be in Latin, which nobody in the audience understood. They would recite, they would repeat it. They know, I mean, they probably memorized what it means in English, but they didn't know Latin. And then finally, it was Second Vatican Council in the 60s. They said, "No, we're going to go ahead and do it in English, or we're going to go ahead and do it in other than Latin." Big war in the church. All right, let's stop. Did you still want to say something, Brian? No? Okay, let's quit. I don't know. I said a bunch of stuff. I don't know whether it was right. We'll see. I'll see y'all later. I'll say more stuff later. I won't know whether it's right.
I